Hello all. Today I would like to introduce you one of most interesting colleagues. I've come to meet of late, Hubert Fleming. Hugh, how are you? You are one of the most recognized water consultants worldwide, involved with a lot of interesting and innovative projects. Would you like
Good
to give
morning,
a quick
Christoph.
intro of what you're currently doing?
Currently doing. I, I- well, it's an incredibly interesting time in the water space, right? I think for me, a large portion of what I'm doing is a course in brine management, particularly desalination, but also industrial brine management, oil and gas, semiconductor, sustainable energy plants, hydrogen, ammonia. Primarily because the issue of waste management has become the driver for many of these projects. I'm also fairly heavily involved in overall water stewardship programs for both public and private sector. And what that means is basically the water cycle of looking from your water sourcing, making sure that it's sustainable, not competitive with other human needs, make sure it has long-term viability and is replenishable, um, all the way through to the water treatment, through to waste management, circular economy and recovery. So yeah, it's a broad spectrum of activity.
We have been both very busy on the Brine projects. How do you think this market will move forwards for the next years?
Well, I think with respect to brine management, historically it hadn't been an issue. Obviously, disposal was pretty straightforward. It was either a deep well or in a case of seawater plants back into an ocean. And so it was really considered as essentially a zero cost. But that's completely changed in a fairly fast time frame in very recent years, both with the dynamics of increasing desalination facilities, both at the coast, but also inland, and particularly inland desal,
Mhm.
both public sector drinking water plants as well as industrial ones, is growing faster than sea water desal plants. And so that means that you have to have some better way to manage brine. And so all of a sudden, the inability to dispose in an ocean or in a deep well somewhere, which is more of a U.S. thing, but it's done in certain parts of the world, is gone, essentially gone. And so all of a sudden, the cost of brine management is skyrocketed, and that's in many cases driving the dynamics and the economics of the overall project. So to your question, I think that we're in the early days of figuring out better ways to do that. There's no one way, there's multiple ways. And effectively, it's creating a market. It's creating a market economy for both new technologies, new organizations who can manage brine, and also new business approaches to sort of integrating that with the water treatment part.
And one of those new business approaches that we were talking earlier is a term that you are using, skinny valorization, correct? And what would that entail?
Yeah, so valorization is one way to look at brine management. It's only one, essentially meaning recovery of some products from the brine. Complete valorization would essentially mean taking all the brine and recovering multiple products so that effectively there's little or no brine left, and it would be essentially a zero liquid discharge facility in operation. The term skinny valorization, or maybe I've heard others call it hybrid valorization or partial valorization, effectively says, well, look, you may not need to, or the economics of the particular project may not warrant going all the way to recovery of all these different products and management of the entire brine. There are probably situations where there is economic value to simply recovering part of that stream.
Mhm.
Case in point might be at a desalination plant where the desalination plant can reuse chlorine or hypochlorite for disinfection. It could use caustic for front end treatment of the pH adjustment of the feed water. It might be able to use some other products, but it couldn't use the rest of the brine. So that in that case, you might recover part of the brine. Or another example might be if you're in a situation where there's value in running a chloralkali cell to treat a brine to recover chlorine and sodium and caustic, sodium hydroxide, but not anything else, then and that's at least partial recovery. And so when you look at the economics of these things, to recover everything really adds a lot of capital, but it adds a requirement for a lot of off-takers of those products, and that may not be possible at any place other than some of the larger projects around the world. So skinny valorization offers the opportunity to do brine management and recovery, but even in smaller projects and more isolated ones.
So do you think we can overcome these problems by applying economy of scale and creating central separation hubs, much like the solid garbage recycling concept, where you have trucks coming from neighborhood to neighborhood? What if we did the same concept but with solid mixed brines, the leftovers with from smaller different brine treatment projects?
Well, that's exactly the concept we started pursuing, and you've hit the right analogy. If you look at solid waste today, that's exactly what's happened to municipal solid waste. It's also what's generally happened in municipal and industrial biosolids management. It's hard to justify that many specific biosolids treatment facilities at a municipal wastewater plant, for example, but there are some economically viable regional ones. So it's very much the same thing, because in brine valorization which is the inorganic analog to that, small plants, when you run the numbers, have issues in two ways. One, the economies of scale of the capital you have to invest are not great in terms of the capital employed relative to the output. That requires scale. The other bigger issue, and frankly, I think the primary one, is that if you're generating a valued product, you have to have somebody who wants to buy it and some place to go for it and for it to go. And so effectively, it's very, very difficult to contract an off-taker for each of these products at very small scale. There's simply no economies of supply chain. Transportation becomes a huge issue, and the volume becomes important. So how do you overcome that? Well, a couple of ways to overcome it, and one of them is what you suggested, which is to go to more of a regional concept where you recognize that you have a number of smaller plants, desalination or otherwise, and you're generating brines of relatively smaller volume, but you can concentrate them. We're seeing some examples of that now. I mean, in the US where I'm at, we have, for example, the brine line in California. In fact, we have several brine lines which companies can put their brine into and go to a facility. And we're doing that in our facility in El Paso. Well, that's a single facility, but it's very large. But the point is, there's an opportunities to do regional facilities where you have some degree of concentration of smaller desalination or water treatment plants.
Do you think that the technologies are mature enough to be able to do this kind of projects?
I think it's borderline today. I think there are projects that are already economical, if as done. However, for the market to mature, to mean instead of seeing one or two or three facilities, we'll see hundreds, remembering that we have thousands of desalination plants around the world. We have thousands of produced water from oil and gas. We've got all these various other opportunities. There are some technical needs. One of them is to find alternatives to evaporative approaches for the zero liquid discharge. Another is to be more selective or selective technologies in terms of recovery of individual products, magnesium calcium separation, for example, or direct to magnesium metal, or even in the case if you have lithium, being able to go directly to lithium. Those things today are okay, but there's some opportunities in technology. And another one is really the upfront part to simply get the maximum amount of recovery in the RO. Essentially, we finally have some osmotically assisted processes to maximize RO recovery, but they're also in their infancy. And so that's really key to brine economics, is to get as much upfront recovery as you can, which minimizes the volume, obviously, of the brine waste to manage.
Do you think that potentially investment capital can speed up the process of creating references for this kind of projects and technologies?
Well, I think it has to be investment capital. I mean, you can look at governments, and there's different governments are also doing some things in countries where this is a significant issue. But at the end of the day, governments aren't generally going to be the technical drivers for creating ways to manage brine. They're looking for essentially the private sector to do that. And so the private sector needs to be a combination of technologies, but it needs mostly to provide financing in a way that you can create those technologies and also create those projects. They have to be economically viable. And so, municipalities can't, I don't think about this as simply a cost in their desal plant. They have to think about, the overall economics. And for them, the best way to do that is to have the private sector, in terms of financing, manage that to make their project financeable. The other point to that is, again, at the end of the day, somebody has to take those products, and that means private sector, and that means a financial model, which is not common for a water treatment plant, that you would typically generate a product that has to be paid for.
I think maybe the incoming taxes for carbon footprints, maybe also water footprints, will play a significant role on our change of attitude.
That's a great point, and I was going to make that one too. That's another way that you can go, and it's not either or. That can also be valued. If you currently have carbon credits, we have credits for other sorts of things that we're trying to do for sustainable operation. It's not unreasonable to think about generate. And by the way, the other analogy in water is, at least in some countries, including the US, we've had programs for nitrogen credits and phosphorus credits for wastewater management, to essentially eliminate them and or recover them for agriculture. Well, you can do exactly the same thing for brine. You can have salt credits or calcium credits or magnesium credits. And that would go a long way, particularly for public sector projects, to manage brine.
You have dealt with quite a number of innovative technologies over the years as in your consulting business. What do you think are the biggest hurdles when it comes to the management of these technology suppliers and startups? Are there any behavioral issues from perhaps the management that hold these technologies back?
Yeah, I have to think about how to respond to that. I think there's been a change. I mean, I've been doing this over 40 years, and including development of technology, and of course, like you, evaluating technologies. I think a couple things have changed. One of them is that there is a bit of a view of technology management today that says, well, first off, there's a general view of, if I have in my view, a new technology, I'm going to start a company.
Mm-hmm.
That can make sense, but frankly, now you're in your own economics. Historically, we've taken technologies and learned to team it with end users. We don't see as much of that today. You see companies trying to do their own thing, which I think is limiting. And so as a result, we have an awful lot of really small companies, and so many quote unquote technologies that it's almost difficult to tell who has viability. The other point I would make is that technology companies, because they've been highly valued most recently, seem to have a little more of a short-term view. They seem to have a view of, I'm going to develop something. I'll do at least one successful demonstration, and I'll go look and monetize it to the world, meaning I'll sell it to some large strategic or private equity firm. And so there's not the longer term view that used to exist that says, hey, I'm going to build a business. I'm going to do 20 or 50 successful projects. I'm going to own this for 10 years or more. And so I think that's a little bit of a trend as well. So I think that's both of those are a little bit of an issue today.
Yeah, from my side, I have seen way too many people working in silos and presenting their work to the outer world as a black box, which is something that doesn't really help to progress their business. That's
Well,
for sure.
that's exactly right. And is you routinely evaluate technologies for clients. I do the same. And the black box approach sounds good, but it doesn't do anything. You're not going to win projects because a client has to have comfort with the technology that they're going to install. And they simply won't if they don't understand your technology, feel that it makes sense, that there's the risk. I mean, these projects are based heavily on risk management, and that's just too high a risk for many
Understood.
significant clients to take.
Understood. And I would like, because I know that you have to go to other meetings, you have a very busy schedule. I would like to close the conversation by asking you something that I regularly ask other people here in these talks. How do you think we can bring added value to the water sector? Because as it stands right now, it is a pretty low, it is considered a pretty low value industry. Water is thought more as a utility rather than something of value.
That's fair. And in much of the world, the price to a consumer in the home of water is less than his bill for his TV services a month, and as long as that's the case, you're right that water is undervalued. Water and wastewater collectively is undervalued. And it's in certain cases even very undervalued. Here in the US, for example, it's very, very low. It's going up. We're now seeing water bills double and triple because we're trying to get closer to the true cost of water. Uh, and we've paid for it around the world, meaning if you value it that low, you don't have the capital to manage and maintain the infrastructure. So we see that from pipelines. I mean, I'll just use example in the US. The average drinking water pipeline in the US is 60 years old. The average wastewater one is over that. It's 70 years old. We still literally have a couple of places in the country that have wooden pipes from the early 1900s because we don't have the capital to upgrade them because the rate structure is not sufficient. So the number one need in water is recognition of value, and that's both drinking water and wastewater. And the other way I would put it, at least from the public sector view, is that we have this sort of inverted pyramid of need that says at the top of that are things like first responders, police, fire. After that, it's libraries and gas mains. If you have a gas fire, natural gas pipeline burst, you take care of that. At the absolute bottom of that becomes things like drinking water and sewage and sanitary sewage management. It's at the bottom of the pyramid in priorities to public sectors. And the other part of that that's just a sort of a operational issue is that in many parts of the world, and frankly most of the world, there is no national water policy, much like there is an energy policy, for example, or defense strategy for things like semiconductors used for defense products. So the net effect is you have all these individual water entities that have to manage on their own, and there are a few exceptions. The UK, Australia being decent exceptions, but because of their longer term AMP structure. But there aren't many. And the net effect is we don't value water and wastewater appropriately.
the real question is how can we make the people outside of our very tight professional circle understand that water is of strategic importance?
Well, I think we're getting there, right? I think it's taken some time and it's still not there, but there is a recognition, even in places, and it's driven by need. I mean, we're looking now at, I guess the figures are saying we're within a couple of years of the crossover point globally of where the amount of water available is less than the need. And we're obviously seeing that in at least 1/3 of the world where the scarcity is already manifests itself. And conversely, on wastewater, similarly, we're seeing less than 50% of the world having access to sanitary facilities. So I think in the developed world, where you are and where I am, it's less of a concern, but we're now even there starting to see the competition of water and wastewater services for human needs with industry. And so I think as it affects individuals' lives, and we're literally starting to see that. I mean, a case in point in the US, we have a need of about 325 to 350 million gallon per day of additional water for all these sustainable energy projects. If you look at that number, that's a full third of almost half of the again of the amount of water we generate per day for the whole country that we actually have additional need for just to meet our energy requirements. That's crazy. We don't have it.
And I know that you are also involved in the NAWI initiative in the US, yeah, who is exactly trying to figure out solutions for this very issue. So I hope that in the future, perhaps we can have a couple more interesting conversations on that topic. Here, I would like to thank you very much for your time, taking time out of your very busy schedule to have this talk today. Have a nice day ahead. Take care, and we stay in touch.
All right, very good, Christos. Thank you so much.
Ciao, ciao.